In a world where fortunes are counted in billions, and trust is a forgotten currency, what is the true value of a simple act of kindness? For Sterling Hayes, a man who could buy anything except his son's sight, the answer was about to be revealed. He sat in a greasy spoon diner disguised as a nobody, his heart a fortress of suspicion. He was there to watch his blind son Leo navigate a world that had turned dark. But what he saw instead was a broke, exhausted waitress perform a gesture of such profound humanity that it would shatter his cynical world and set in motion a chain of events that would expose a devastating secret and change all of their lives forever. This is the story of how one small moment of grace in the dark can ignite the brightest light. The smell of stale coffee and fried onions clung to the air in The Corner Spoon, a scent Sterling Hayes hadn't willingly inhaled in 2 decades. It was the smell of desperation, of chipped formica countertops and dreams deferred. To him it was an alien landscape. He sat hunched in a cracked vinyl booth, a worn-out baseball cap pulled low over his brow, a 3-day stubble artfully applied to his jaw. The disguise was simple but effective. Here he wasn't Sterling Hayes, CEO of Aura Innovations, the titan of robotics and AI, whose net worth was a subject of fevered speculation in the financial press. Here he was just Stan, a down-on-his-luck father treating his son to a meal. His son, 10-year-old Leo, sat opposite him, his small hands resting on the table. Leo's world had gone permanently black 6 months ago, the same moment Sterling's had fractured. A catastrophic pileup on the Pacific Coast Highway, a symphony of screeching tires and shattering glass that had stolen Leo's sight and the life of his mother Isabel. Now every breath Sterling took was tinged with guilt and a ferocious, all-consuming protectiveness for the boy who was his only remaining anchor. This diner excursion was an experiment, one recommended by a litany of child psychologists. Let him experience the world, Sterling. Don't let his blindness or your wealth become a cage. So here they were. Sterling had chosen the Corner Spoon for its anonymity, a place so far removed from his world of Michelin stars and private chefs that no one would ever look for him here. He watched as a waitress approached their table. She looked bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep into a person's soul. Her name tag slightly askew on her faded pink uniform read Clara. There were faint smudges of what looked like charcoal on her cheek, and her auburn hair was hastily tied back, loose strands framing a face that was pretty in a way that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with the intelligence in her deep green eyes. "What can I get for you folks today?" she asked, her voice soft but weary. "I'll have a black coffee. My son. He'll have the cheeseburger deluxe and a chocolate milkshake." Sterling said, his voice a low grumble. Clara's gaze softened as she looked at Leo, noticing the way his head was tilted, listening rather than looking. She didn't stare or offer pity, a reaction Sterling had come to despise. She simply smiled. "A cheeseburger deluxe and a chocolate milkshake coming right up for the gentleman." Leo, who had been withdrawn and silent, offered a small, hesitant smile in her direction. It was the first genuine smile Sterling had seen from him in weeks. When the food arrived, the real test began. Sterling had watched Leo struggle, the frustration mounting as he tried to navigate a plate of food he couldn't see. The simple act of eating had become a minefield of spills and embarrassment. Leo fumbled with his fork, poking at the plate, his brows furrowed in concentration. He managed to get a few fries, but the burger was a formidable challenge. Sterling felt a familiar pang of helplessness. He could design a robot that could perform microscopic surgery, but he couldn't help his own son eat a hamburger without feeling like a failure. He was about to intervene to cut the burger for him, as he usually did, when Clara returned. She hadn't been summoned. She simply appeared holding a glass of water. She saw Leo's struggle, the tension in his small shoulders. Sterling's hand instinctively tightened under the table, his suspicion flaring. He was ready for the syrupy pity, the clumsy attempt to curry favor from the father she didn't know was watching her every move, but it never came. Clara knelt down so her voice was level with Leo's ear. "Hey there," she said gently. You know the best way to tackle a burger this epic is to think of it like a map. Would you like me to give you the tour? Leo hesitated, then nodded shyly. Okay, she whispered, her voice a conspiratorial secret between them. Imagine the plate as a clock. Right at 12 o'clock, that's where the main event is, the big juicy burger. It's warm under your fingertips. To your right, around 3 o'clock, you've got a mountain of crispy, salty fries. And way over at 9 o'clock is a little pickle hiding out. He's the tangy surprise. Sterling sat frozen, utterly captivated. He had spent thousands on occupational therapists who had never thought to make it a game and adventure. Clara gently took Leo's hand and guided it to the burger. See, 12 o'clock. She then moved his hand to the fries. 3 o'clock. Leo's fingers brushed against them and he grinned, but she didn't stop there. She saw the burger was still too big for him to handle. This guy is a two-hander, she said brightly, but I have a secret weapon. She quickly went to the counter and returned with a knife. Without a word to Sterling, she deftly cut the burger into 4 manageable quarters. All right, your first piece is ready for launch at 12 o'clock, she murmured to Leo. This time when Leo reached for his food, it was with confidence. He took a bite and a smear of ketchup appeared on his cheek. Instead of making a fuss, Clara just dipped a napkin in water and gently dabbed it away. You've got a little battle paint there, champ, she chuckled. Shows you're winning the war. Sterling watched his carefully constructed walls of cynicism beginning to crumble. This wasn't a performance. This was genuine, unprompted kindness. He had seen the world's best fakes, the sycophants who could smell money from a mile away. This was different. This was real. He saw the way she treated the elderly couple in the next booth with the same gentle patience, the way she shared a joke with the grizzled cook through the service window. He paid the bill, leaving a $100 bill on the table for a $20 tab. It was a test. A crude, simple test. Would she pocket it? Would she come running after him, assuming it was a mistake? He had to know. As he and Leo walked out, Leo's hand gripping his tightly, the boy whispered, "Dad, she was nice." Sterling just grunted in response, his mind whirring. He glanced back through the greasy window of the corner spoon. He saw Clara pick up the bill. He saw her eyes widen in shock. She looked around, then rushed to the cash register. He watched as she spoke to the owner, a portly man named Sal. She gestured to the bill, then to the door they had just exited. Sal shook his head, shrugged, and pointed to the tip jar. Clara hesitated, then folded the bill and slipped it not into her apron pocket but into the communal tip jar on the counter, a jar shared by all the staff. Sterling Hayes stood on that grimy sidewalk, the sounds of the city fading into a dull roar. He had just witnessed an act of integrity so pure it felt like a punch to the gut. The poor waitress had not only fed his blind son's stomach, she had nourished his soul. And in doing so, she had unknowingly issued a challenge to a billionaire's hardened heart. The test was over, but for Sterling Hayes, the real story was just beginning. A single act of kindness could be an anomaly. Sterling Hayes hadn't built a multi-billion-dollar empire by believing in anomalies. He believed in data and patterns, in vetting every variable until it yielded a predictable outcome. Clara Jenkins was now the most compelling variable in his life, and he needed more data. For the next 2 weeks, Stan and Leo became regulars at the Corner Spoon. They always sat in Clara's section. Sterling was a meticulous observer, cataloging every interaction. He saw her slip a free muffin into the bag of a homeless man who came in every morning for a cheap coffee. He watched her spend 10 minutes of her precious break time helping an elderly woman read the menu, her finger tracing the words with painstaking patience. He heard her talking to another waitress. Brenda, a woman with sharp, jealous eyes about her grandmother's medical bills and the rising cost of her night classes at the local community college. Each visit was a carefully constructed piece of his charade. He played the part of Stan, a struggling freelance graphic designer, a widower trying his best. He spoke of his wife's passing in vague, sad terms, mirroring his own grief, but stripping it of its glamorous headline-making details. "It's just been hard, you know," he said to Clara one afternoon, watching as she refilled his coffee cup, helping him adjust. The world, It's not built for people who are different." Clara paused, her gaze filled with an empathy that felt unnervingly real. "No, it's not," she agreed softly. "But sometimes people can be. He's a strong kid, and he has you. That's more than a lot of people have." There it was again. No pity, just a simple, powerful acknowledgement. He found himself wanting to talk to her, to shed the Stan persona and just be Sterling. But he couldn't. The stakes were too high. His test escalated. One day he accidentally left his wallet on the booth seat. It contained over $1,000 in cash and credit cards with stratospheric limits. He was half a block away when he heard footsteps pounding on the pavement behind him. "Sir, Mr. Miller, you forgot this." It was Clara, breathless, holding out the worn leather wallet he used for his disguise. "Oh, thank you. Thank you so much," he said, feigning relief. "I don't know what I would have done." "No problem at all," she said, giving Leo a quick, warm smile before turning to jog back to the diner. She hadn't even peeked inside. He knew because he had tucked a single stray hair into the cash fold. It was still there, undisturbed. The data was becoming conclusive, but it was Brenda, the other waitress, who provided the final unexpected piece of the puzzle. Sterling was there on a particularly busy Tuesday. Leo had been quiet and withdrawn all morning. Clara, sensing his mood, brought his milkshake with a little smiley face drawn in chocolate syrup on top of the whipped cream. "A little sunshine for a cloudy day," she'd said. Leo had traced the smile with his finger, and for the first time that day, the corner of his own mouth turned up. Later, as Sterling was paying at the counter, he overheard Brenda talking to Sal, the owner. Her voice was a venomous whisper. "Look at her, Sal. Little Miss Perfect. You see the way that guy with the kid looks at her. He's been leaving $100 tips. She must be spinning him some real sob story. I bet she's playing him, trying to latch on to a lonely widower." Sal grunted, not looking up from his racing form. "Clara's a good kid. Leave her be." "A good kid," Brenda scoffed. "She's a schemer. She probably tells him all about her sick grandma and her art school dreams. People like that are always looking for a handout, a shortcut." Sterling felt a cold fury rise in his chest. Brenda's ugly speculation was a perfect reflection of his own initial suspicions. Hearing them voiced by someone else, however, made them sound cheap and vile. He had been looking at Clara through this exact lens, assuming the worst, projecting the deceit he'd seen 1,000 times onto this one young woman who had shown him nothing but the opposite. Brenda's poison had acted as an antidote. It clarified everything. Clara wasn't putting on a show for a potential mark. She was simply being herself, and her co-workers' jealousy was twisting that goodness into something transactional and ugly. That was the last day Stan ever visited the Corner Spoon. The charade was over. He had his data, and the pattern was undeniable. Clara Jenkins was not an anomaly. She was an anchor of decency in a world adrift. Now the question was no longer about her character. It was about what he, Sterling Hayes, was going to do about it. He had a problem that money, for once, might actually be able to solve. He wasn't just going to change her life with a grand gesture. That was too simple, too impersonal. He was going to entwine their lives in a way neither of them could possibly imagine. The plan began to form in his mind, intricate and far-reaching. It would start with a job offer, but it would end somewhere else entirely. He just hoped she would say yes. The Blacktown car, a sleek and silent predator, was utterly alien on the gritty street where Clara Jenkins lived. It was parked across from her crumbling brick apartment building, its tinted windows reflecting the gray, weary facade. Clara saw it as she walked home from her night class, her art portfolio tucked under one arm, her waitress apron bundled in her tote bag. Her first thought was that someone was being evicted. She trudged up the 3 flights of stairs, her legs aching from her double shift. The door to her small apartment was ajar. A sliver of panic shot through her. She shared the tiny space with her grandmother Rose, whose heart condition was a constant low-grade source of fear. Pushing the door open, she found Rose sitting on their threadbare sofa looking flustered. Opposite her, in their only decent armchair, sat a man. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than their rent for a year. His face was clean-shaven, his hair perfectly styled. It took Clara a full 10 seconds to place him. It was Stan. But it wasn't Stan. The tired, defeated slump was gone, replaced by an aura of power and confidence that seemed to suck the very air out of the room. "Stan?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He stood up, his height surprising her. "That's not my real name, Clara. Please forgive the deception. My name is Sterling Hayes." The name hit her like a physical blow. Sterling Hayes, Aura Innovations. She had seen his face on the cover of Forbes magazine at the grocery store checkout. He was a myth, a local legend, a figure of unimaginable wealth and influence. And he had been sitting in her section at the diner drinking cheap coffee for weeks. "And this," Sterling said, gesturing to a man standing quietly by the door, a man she hadn't even noticed, "is my head of security, Arthur." Clara's mind raced. Was she in trouble? The $100 tips. Had he thought she'd stolen them? I don't understand." "Please sit," Sterling said, his voice calm and measured. It was the same voice, but stripped of the working man's grit he'd affected. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. Leo is my son. I was at the diner because I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" Clara asked, sinking onto the sofa next to her grandmother. "Of you," he said simply. "I have observed you for weeks, Clara. I've seen your kindness, your patience, your integrity. I've seen you deal with my son not as a disability, but as a person, and I have a proposition for you." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "I want to hire you. I want you to be a private companion and tutor for Leo. Your responsibilities would be to help him with his studies, of course, but more than that, to help him experience the world again, to be his eyes in a way, to use your unique perspective to describe things to him, to help him navigate his new reality." Clara was speechless. Her tutor for a billionaire's son. The position comes with a salary of $200,000 a year. Sterling continued, his eyes fixed on hers. The number hung in the air, seeming to warp the very fabric of the tiny, cluttered room. $200,000. It was an astronomical, life-altering sum. It meant Rose's medication paid in full. It meant no more double shifts. It meant she could afford the good canvases, the expensive oil paints she dreamed of. It meant freedom. "Furthermore," he added, "all of your grandmother's medical expenses will be covered by my family's private health plan, effective immediately. And your tuition for a 4-year degree program at the finest art school in the country will be paid for. You would of course live at my estate. A private suite of rooms would be provided for you." It was too much. A gilded cage, a fairy tale offer that felt impossibly, terrifyingly real. Her mind reeled, a mix of elation and suspicion. Why her waitress from the corner spoon? "Why?" she finally managed to whisper. "You could hire the best qualified people in the world. PhDs, specialists." "I have," Sterling said, a flicker of weariness crossing his features. "They come with textbooks and theories. They treat Leo like a case study. You treated him like a kid eating a hamburger. You gave him a map of his plate and called his ketchup stain battle paint. You cannot teach that, Clara. You cannot buy it. It must be innate. I am offering you this job not despite the fact that you are a waitress. I am offering it because of the person you are, which I was only able to witness because you are a waitress." Her grandmother, who had been listening with wide, disbelieving eyes, squeezed her hand. "Clara, dear." Clara looked at her grandmother's frail hand, then around the cramped apartment with its peeling paint and leaking faucet. This offer wasn't just a life raft, it was a luxury yacht. But something held her back. To leave her world so completely to step into his, it felt like she would be giving up a part of herself. I need I need to think about it, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Sterling nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. He had expected an immediate tearful acceptance. Her hesitation was yet another data point confirming his choice. Of course, he said, standing. Take 24 hours. Arthur will remain stationed outside your building for your security until you decide. Here is my private number. Call me when you have an answer. He placed a sleek, impossibly thin business card on their rickety coffee table. It was heavy, made of black metal with his name and a single number embossed in silver. Then, with a polite nod, he and his security man were gone, leaving behind a silence that was heavier and more profound than the noise of their presence. Clara stared at the card. $200,000. A new life. All because she had shown a little boy how to eat a hamburger. She felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff with no idea if the world below was a paradise or an abyss. She picked up the card, its cold weight a tangible symbol of the choice she had to make. The choice that would, without question, change her life forever. But as she stood there, a forgotten memory, a whisper from her family's painful past, began to stir in the deep recesses of her mind. A faint, discordant note in the symphony of her good fortune. A note that was somehow connected to the name on that card, Sterling Hayes. Clara said yes. The decision felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a current too strong to fight. Within a week, she and her grandmother were swept from their cramped apartment into the rarefied air of the Hayes estate. Rose was settled into a beautiful guest cottage with a full-time nurse, looking healthier and more relaxed than Clara had seen her in years. Clara herself was given a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire old apartment building floor. It had a bedroom, a living area, and an art studio with a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the manicured gardens, already stocked with every art supply she could ever imagine. It was a dream, but a disorienting one. The sheer scale of the wealth was suffocating. The silence of the mansion, broken only by the hushed footsteps of staff, was a stark contrast to the constant clamor of her old life. Her work with Leo, however, was an anchor. He was a bright, sensitive boy trapped not only by his blindness, but by his grief. Clara set about fulfilling Sterling's request to be his eyes. She didn't just read his textbooks to him, she acted them out using different voices for historical figures. When they studied botany, she brought him into the garden, letting him feel the waxy surface of a magnolia leaf, the delicate fragility of a rose petal, the rough bark of a century-old oak. She used her artistic sensibility to translate the visual world into something he could understand. "The sunset tonight, Leo," she'd say, sitting with him on the veranda. "It's not just orange. It's a deep, warm color like the feeling of a cashmere blanket. But then there are streaks of pink, like the taste of strawberries, and a deep purple underneath, like the sound of a cello." Slowly, miraculously, Leo began to emerge from his shell. He started asking questions again, his natural curiosity reawakening. He laughed more. Sterling watched from a distance, his gratitude towards Clara growing into a deep, profound respect. He gave her complete autonomy, treating her less like an employee and more like a trusted partner in his son's recovery. The formal distance he initially maintained began to melt away, replaced by late evening conversations over coffee after Leo was asleep, where he would ask about her art, her life, her dreams. It was during one of these quiet evenings, about a month into her new life, that the first crack appeared in the perfect facade. Sterling had invited her to the main library to look over some new educational software. The library was a two-story cathedral of books, all dark mahogany and worn leather. While Sterling was on a phone call, Clara wandered the shelves, running her hand over the leather-bound spines. On a lower shelf tucked away was a section of corporate archives-bound volumes of Aura Innovation's annual reports. Curious, she pulled one out from about 15 years ago. She flipped through the glossy pages, seeing a younger Sterling Hayes accepting an award. Then she turned a page and froze. It was a group photo of the company's lead engineering team from that year. In the back row, looking younger and full of a hope she could barely remember, was her father, Robert Jenkins. The air left her lungs. Her father had never spoken much about his work, but she knew he had been a software engineer. He'd been laid off from a big tech firm when she was a teenager. The layoff had broken his spirit. He claimed his ideas were stolen, that he was pushed out after a major project failure he had tried to prevent. He'd drifted from one dead-end job to another after that, a cloud of bitterness and defeat hanging over him until his sudden death from a heart attack 5 years ago. He had never once mentioned the name Aura Innovations. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It had to be a coincidence. But it felt too specific, too targeted. That night she couldn't sleep. She called her grandmother. "Nana," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "I need you to tell me something. The big tech company Dad used to work for. The one that laid him off. Do you remember its name?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Rose finally spoke, her voice was heavy with a sorrow that spanned more than a decade. "I never wanted to burden you with it, Clara. He made me promise. The company was Aura Innovations." The phone felt slick in Clara's hand. "Why, Nana? What happened?" "Your father. He was a brilliant man," Rose said, her voice cracking. "He was working on a new automated vehicle guidance system, the Pathfinder project. He found a critical flaw in the core code, a vulnerability that could allow for an external takeover. He warned his superiors, wrote memos, begged them to delay the launch. But his direct manager, a man named Peterson, buried his reports. Peterson wanted the promotion, the glory. The system was pushed through for a demonstration, and it failed spectacularly. A test vehicle crashed. It was a huge embarrassment for the company. They needed a scapegoat. Peterson and the higher-ups, they blamed your father. They fired him, blacklisted him in the industry. They ruined him, Clara. That man, Sterling Hayes, his company destroyed your father." Clara sank onto her bed, the luxurious silk of the duvet feeling cold and alien against her skin. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The familiar name she couldn't place. The undercurrent of tragedy that had defined her family's life. She was living in the home of the man whose corporate machine had crushed her father's spirit and precipitated his early death. Her salary, her grandmother's health care, her art school tuition. It was all blood money paid from the profits of her family's ruin. And the most sickening irony of all, she was here to help heal Sterling Hayes' son, whose own life was shattered by a vehicle crash. The world wasn't just cruel, it was poetic in its cruelty. Every kind word she had spoken to Leo, every moment of connection, was now tainted. She was a ghost at the feast, a living reminder of a history Sterling Hayes had likely long forgotten, but one that had shaped every moment of her life. The question was no longer what she would do with her future, but what she would do with this devastating truth from the past. For 2 days, Clara moved through the Hayes mansion like a phantom. She performed her duties with a chilling precision, her warmth replaced by a brittle professional shell. The easy laughter with Leo felt forced, the patient explanations strained. Leo, with his heightened senses, noticed the shift immediately. "Are you mad at me, Clara?" he asked, his voice small as they sat in the garden. "No, sweetie, of course not," she said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'm just tired." Sterling noticed it too. The comfortable evening conversations ceased. She was polite, distant, her green eyes clouded with a storm he couldn't comprehend. He tried to broach the subject, but she evaded him with practiced ease. He knew something was terribly wrong. He assumed she was overwhelmed, perhaps regretting her decision. He feared she was going to leave. He found his answer on the third night. Unable to sleep, he walked down to the library and found her there, standing in the center of the room. The bound corporate archive from 15 years ago was open on the large oak desk, illuminated by a single green glass lamp. Her father's face stared up from the photograph. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She just looked at him, her expression a mixture of profound grief and white-hot anger. "His name was Robert Jenkins," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Does that name mean anything to you, Mr. Hayes?" Sterling frowned, searching his memory. "Jenkins? I don't believe so. Should it?" A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Clara's lips. "No. Why should you remember one engineer out of thousands? He was just a cog in your great machine, wasn't he? A disposable part. She tapped the photograph. This man, my father, he worked for you. He was the lead programmer on the Pathfinder project. Recognition dawned on Sterling's face, followed by a look of grim understanding. Pathfinder. That was a disaster. The lead engineer was incompetent. There was a major security flaw, a crash during the demonstration. We had to terminate his employment. Incompetent. Clara's voice rose, echoing in the cavernous library. He was brilliant. He was the one who found the flaw. He warned everyone. He wrote memos. He pleaded with his manager, Mr. Peterson, I believe. He said the system was vulnerable, that it could be hijacked. But you didn't listen. Your company didn't listen. It was easier to make him the scapegoat than to admit a multi-million-dollar project was compromised. Sterling was stunned into silence. He remembered the Pathfinder debacle, of course. It had been a black eye for Aura in its early days. He remembered his then COO Peterson handling the fallout, assuring him they had cut the deadwood responsible. He had trusted his subordinate. He had been so focused on the next innovation, the next quarterly report, that he'd never questioned the details of the personnel file. You didn't just fire him. Clara continued, tears streaming down her face, now a torrent of long-suppressed pain. You destroyed him. You blacklisted him. He could never get another job in his field. He died at 55 of a heart attack, a broken man who believed he was a failure. My whole life, my family's life, has been a struggle because of what happened in this company. And now I'm here living in your palace, taking your money. Money that was built on the back of my father's ruin. Do you have any idea what that feels like? The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and undeniable. Sterling felt a profound sense of shame wash over him, not just for the potential injustice, but for his own ignorance. He prided himself on knowing every aspect of his business, yet here was a story of profound human collateral damage he'd known nothing about. His first instinct was defensive, the corporate reflex to deny and deflect. But looking at Clara's anguished face, at the raw and honest pain in her eyes, he knew that wouldn't suffice. He had seen her character. She was not a liar. He walked slowly to the desk and looked down at the photo of Robert Jenkins. He saw the intelligence in the man's eyes, the same light he saw in Clara's. I did not know, he said, his voice heavy. I can't defend what I don't know, but I swear to you, Clara, I will find out. I will find the truth. The truth won't bring my father back, she wept. No, Sterling said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It won't, but it can restore his name, and it can hold the people who did this accountable. He looked up from the photo and met her gaze. The power dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the benevolent billionaire and she the grateful waitress. They were two people linked by a deep and painful history, standing on opposite sides of a chasm of injustice. Peterson, Sterling said, the name solidifying in his mind. Richard Peterson is still with the company. He's my executive vice president of operations. The implications of that fact settled over the room with a chilling weight. The man who had allegedly buried her father's warnings and ruined his life was now one of the most powerful men in Sterling Hayes' empire. This was no longer about a past mistake. The ghost in the machine was very much alive, and it had been walking the halls of Aura Innovations for 15 years. The reckoning was no longer just about the past. It was about to storm the gates of the present. The atmosphere at the Hayes estate grew tense. Clara agreed to stay, but her presence was a constant silent accusation. She and Sterling were now bound by a new unspoken pact to unearth the truth about Robert Jenkins. It was a fragile and unlikely alliance forged in a library in the middle of the night. Sterling was a man of action. The next morning, he didn't go to the office. He summoned a team of forensic accountants and internal affairs specialists, people who reported only to him, to his home study. I want you to pull every file, every email, every memo related to the Pathfinder project from 15 years ago, he commanded, his voice cold as steel. I want a full digital and physical archaeological dig. I want to know everything Robert Jenkins submitted, and I want to know who saw it. And I want a complete profile on Richard Peterson's communications from that period. Do it quietly. No one, especially not Peterson, can know we are looking." While his team dug into the corporate past, Clara provided the human element. She found a box of her father's old things in her grandmother's storage unit. It was filled with dusty floppy disks and notebooks filled with his elegant, precise handwriting. It was a painful journey into the past, reading her father's meticulous notes, his growing desperation clear in the margins. And then she found it. A single leather-bound journal. In it, her father had detailed everything. He wrote about his discovery of the Spectre vulnerability in the Pathfinder code. He documented his meetings with Peterson, quoting his manager's dismissive responses. "Peterson called my concerns theoretical fear-mongering," one entry read. "He said the deadline was non-negotiable and that my job was to sign off, not to philosophize." The final chilling entry was dated the day before the failed demonstration. "I have made a final encrypted copy of my full report and a simulation showing how the Spectre exploit works. Peterson refused to accept it. I am sending it via a third-party server to the project's external hardware contractor as a failsafe. The company is Nexus Dynamics. At least someone will know the truth." Clara's blood ran cold. Nexus Dynamics. The name was infamous. It was Aura Innovation's fiercest and most ruthless competitor, run by the notoriously aggressive CEO Gideon Rourke. Why would her father send his proof to their biggest rival? It seemed like an act of corporate treason. She brought the journal to Sterling. When he read the name Nexus Dynamics, his face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Rourke," he spat. "It's always Rourke." The pieces began to fall into place with dizzying speed. Sterling's team concurrently found fragments of deleted emails from Peterson, not to anyone at Aura, but to a shell corporation that the forensic accountants quickly linked to Nexus Dynamics. The full ugly picture emerged. Peterson hadn't just been an ambitious manager ignoring warnings. He had been a corporate spy. He was a mole for Gideon Rourke, paid to sabotage the Pathfinder project from the inside. He had deliberately ignored Robert Jenkins's warnings and pushed the flawed system forward, ensuring it would fail publicly and humiliate Aura Innovations. Robert Jenkins hadn't just been a scapegoat for incompetence. He'd been the sacrificial lamb in an act of high-stakes corporate espionage. But the final piece of the puzzle was the most horrifying. Sterling, haunted by a new suspicion, had his team pull the full unredacted police and insurance reports from the highway pileup that had killed his wife and blinded his son. They analyzed the data from the other cars involved. The truck that had swerved and caused the initial crash had been a new model from a subsidiary of Nexus Dynamics. And its onboard computer showed a catastrophic system failure just moments before the crash. A failure eerily similar to the Spectre vulnerability Robert Jenkins had discovered 15 years prior. "It wasn't an accident," Sterling whispered, staring at the report, his face ashen. "Rourke didn't just steal the code my company was working on. He implemented it. And that flaw is what caused the crash. That's what killed Isabel and took Leo's sight." The room fell silent. It wasn't just corporate sabotage anymore. It was at the very least negligent homicide. Gideon Rourke's ambition and Richard Peterson's treachery had not only destroyed Clara's father, but had also ripped Sterling's own family apart. The ghost of Robert Jenkins had returned not just to clear his name, but to expose a crime that spanned 15 years and had culminated in an unimaginable tragedy. Sterling Hayes, the man who controlled a global empire, looked at Clara Jenkins, the waitress who had seen the humanity in his son. Their personal grief had converged into a singular, terrible truth. "He's not going to get away with this," Sterling said, his voice a low, dangerous promise. "Neither of them are. We are going to burn them to the ground." The retribution that followed was not a single explosive event, but a meticulous and devastating campaign. Sterling Hayes, having had his world fractured by the sins of these men, now moved with the terrifying precision of a glacier, immense and unstoppable. He dispensed with the public fury, channeling his grief into a cold, calculated strategy that would dismantle the architects of his pain piece by piece. His first move was against Gideon Rourke. He didn't leak the story to the press. That would be chaotic and unpredictable. Instead, he requested an emergency meeting with the board of directors of Nexus Dynamics in their own gleaming skyscraper, a monument to Rourke's aggressive ambition. He walked into the room alone, a stark figure in a dark suit carrying a single slim leather portfolio. The board members, a collection of stern, overconfident men and women, regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Sterling didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Good morning," he began, his voice calm and devoid of emotion. "For the past 15 years, your company has benefited from an act of corporate espionage orchestrated by your CEO. That act involved the deliberate sabotage of an Aura Innovations project and the theft of its core code." He paused, letting the accusation settle in the silent, temperature-controlled room. Normally, this would be a matter for the civil courts. However, the code that Gideon Rourke stole was fundamentally flawed. My engineer, a man named Robert Jenkins, identified the flaw. Your CEO was made aware of this flaw via the mole he had planted in my company. He opened the portfolio and slid copies of Robert's journal entries, Peterson's damning emails, and the technical schematics across the polished mahogany table. Rourke chose to use the flawed code anyway. 6 months ago, that specific vulnerability, the Spectre exploit, my engineer warned of, caused a catastrophic failure in the guidance system of one of your commercial trucks. That failure resulted in a multi-car pileup on the Pacific Coast Highway. His voice dropped, becoming intensely personal, and for the first time the board members saw the abyss of pain behind his controlled facade. "That crash killed my wife, Isabel Hayes, and permanently blinded my 10-year-old son. Your CEO's greed and recklessness are directly responsible." The color drained from the faces around the table. They were no longer looking at a business rival. They were looking at a man who could, with this evidence, bury their company in a mountain of legal battles, shareholder lawsuits, and a public relations nightmare from which they would never recover. Their stock would be worthless by noon. "I am not here for your money," Sterling continued, his voice like chipping ice. "I am here for him. You have 2 hours to announce the immediate termination of Gideon Rourke with cause and the rescinding of his severance package. You will issue a public statement accepting institutional responsibility for gross managerial misconduct. In return, my legal actions will be directed at Rourke as an individual, not at Nexus Dynamics as a corporation. If you refuse, the contents of this portfolio will be in the hands of every major news outlet and the district attorney's office by lunchtime. Your choice." He stood, turned, and walked out, leaving a profound and terrified silence in his wake. An hour later, the press release was issued. Rourke was out, his legacy incinerated. The confrontation with Richard Peterson was more intimate and far crueler. Sterling summoned him to the mansion's library, the very room where the truth had been unearthed. Peterson swaggered in, assuming it was a weekend strategy meeting, a smug smile on his face. He stopped short when he saw Clara standing by the fireplace, her expression unreadable. "An unusual meeting place, Sterling," Peterson said, his tone oily. "And who is this?" "This is Clara Jenkins," Sterling said softly, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Please, Richard, sit." Peterson sat, a flicker of unease crossing his features. Sterling said nothing more. He simply slid the leather-bound journal of Robert Jenkins across the desk. Peterson glanced at it, then at Clara, and a dawning, sickening horror began to creep into his eyes as he made the connection. I don't know what this is," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. "It's a ghost, Richard," Clara said, her voice shaking but strong. "It's my father's ghost. The one you created 15 years ago when you buried his work and passed his warnings off as incompetence. Do you remember him now? The man whose career you sacrificed for a promotion and a payoff from Gideon Rourke?" Peterson lunged for the journal, but Sterling's hand shot out, pinning it to the desk. "It's just a copy, Richard. The original is safe, along with the encrypted emails you thought you'd deleted." The collapse was total. Peterson's face, a mask of corporate confidence, moments before crumpled into a pathetic tableau of fear. He began to babble, to deny, to blame Rourke, to blame Robert Jenkins himself. It was a pathetic, desperate litany of lies from a man who had lived by them for a decade and a half. Sterling listened impassively until he was finished. "Arthur," he said into his phone, "send them in." Two federal agents who had been waiting discreetly in the foyer entered the library. The click of the handcuffs on Peterson's wrists was the only sound, a final definitive punctuation mark on a life of deceit. The press conference a few days later was a global event, standing before a sea of cameras. Sterling Hayes did something few men of his stature ever do. He admitted fault. He spoke of Aura Innovation's institutional failure to listen to one of its most brilliant minds. He lauded Robert Jenkins not as a victim, but as a hero whose integrity was a beacon. He publicly apologized to Clara and her family. Then he announced the creation of the Robert Jenkins Foundation for Ethical Innovation, funded with a personal endowment of $500 million. Its mission was simple: to protect and empower those who dared to speak truth to power within the corporate world. He named Clara Jenkins as a founding member of its board of directors, her name now forever linked with her father's vindicated legacy. In the aftermath, a new kind of life began to take root at the Hayes estate. The opulent mansion, once a lonely palace of grief, slowly became a home. The alliance between Sterling and Clara, forged in justice and shared trauma, softened into a deep, unspoken bond of mutual respect and quiet affection. He pushed her to pursue her art with the same vigor he pursued his business, taking immense pride in her acceptance to RISD. She, in turn, taught him to slow down, to see the world not as a series of problems to be solved, but as a canvas of small moments to be cherished. Their most important project was Leo. Together they helped him understand the full truth of the accident, framing it not as a cruel twist of fate, but as the consequence of bad men making terrible choices. They taught him that the world held both darkness and light, and that his blindness did not mean he had to live in the dark. The culmination of their healing came on a warm spring afternoon in the newly commissioned sculpture garden. The centerpiece, Clara's first major work, was a magnificent bronze sculpture. It was an abstract piece full of sharp, angular lines that spoke of pain and chaos, but which resolved into a soaring, graceful curve that reached for the sky. The texture of it was a story in itself, rough and pitted in some places, perfectly smooth and warm in others. Leo, now 11, explored it with a reverence that was breathtaking to watch. His hands, which had become his eyes, roamed over every surface, reading the story she had crafted for him. "Here," he murmured, his fingers tracing a particularly jagged edge. "This feels like the crash. It's all sharp and loud." He then moved his hands to a flowing, smooth section. "And this is you, Clara. This is what your voice sounds like. It's calm." He reached the sculpture's apex, a single polished point that shone in the sun. "And this is for Mom, isn't it?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It feels like it's going up to the sky." Clara knelt beside him, tears blurring her vision as she wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "Yes, Leo, that's exactly what it is." Sterling stood back, watching the two people who had rebuilt his world. He had started this journey a cynical billionaire disguised as a common man trying to test a poor waitress. He had discovered instead a woman of uncommon strength who had, in her quiet, unassuming way, saved them all. They were not a traditional family, but they were a real one, forged not by blood, but by a truth that had been buried for years. They were a foundation built on the ruins of the past, now strong enough to support a future that was for the first time bright with promise. The story of Sterling, Leo, and Clara reminds us that in a world often blinded by wealth and power, the clearest vision belongs to the heart. It started in a humble diner with a simple act of kindness that no one was supposed to notice. But it grew into a powerful force that exposed a 15-year-old lie, brought down titans of industry, and healed 3 broken souls. It proves that our true worth isn't measured by what we have, but by what we give, and that one person's integrity can be the catalyst that changes everything. If this story of justice, redemption, and the incredible power of human decency touched your heart, please help us share it. Click the like button. Share this video with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that find the extraordinary in the ordinary. What did you think of Clara's incredible strength? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember to always look for the light, especially in the darkest of places.